Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Daily and a happy Tuesday to you all. It's time for a companion piece. Bill Landis had the great idea last week to draft defensive players. We stole that idea from Jim Knowles. We don't know if Ryan Day and Brian Hartline and Justin Fry and Tony Alford and Keenan Bailey did the same thing with the offense, but let's just assume that they did because we're going to. And so Bill's rules were 8 players. Should we do the exact same thing, Bill?
Yeah, let's do 8, and I might have a little bit of a wild card at the end to throw at you. We'll see how this goes. My initial question to you is this: should we just take Marvin Harrison Jr. off the board because he's obviously going to be the first pick for whichever one of us gets the first pick?
Well, let's just talk about him now. How about that?
That sounds great.
He's the unanimous number 1 pick. There's no question, no discussion otherwise. I thought it's been interesting to listen to Brian Hartline so passionately defend Marvin Harrison Jr. as being snubbed by the Biletnikoff voters, whoever. I don't know if I voted for that one or not. I can't remember if they looped the FWAA in for that, the Football Writers Association of America. I think that's what it stands for. Is that 2 A's? I don't know. Doesn't matter. They take my dues. He was the best wide receiver in America last year. I don't think that there's a strong case against him. It didn't go his way. Marvin, before the Peach Bowl, spoke out against that. I mean, in a polite way. Brian Hartline was more aggressive in his defense of his player. He's going to be. It'd take a stunning turn of events or an injury for him not to win this year, I think. But tells you how highly they thought of the way he played last year, that they would still be going to this length 3 months later to talk about it.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by that. I guess Brian Hartline was kind of teed up for it by asking. I think he was asked, are you surprised that he didn't win the Biletnikoff? And Brian said, yeah, anyone with 2 eyes knows that he should have won that award, which I agree with. I don't know if they take it from the FWA or not, but it is not part of the general voting. There's a smaller group of people who vote for the Biletnikoff, and I am one of them. They asked me to do it 2 years ago, and I said yes, and then forgot about it. And then last year I started getting emails from. I was like, oh, I guess I'm still a voter for the Biletnikoff. But I did vote for Marvin first. I didn't think twice about it. Sometimes when I vote for that stuff, I'm like, am I giving too much deference to the Ohio State guy because that's the guy that I see the most, or am I going about this the right way? For this award, I was like, of course it's Marvin Harrison Jr. I was pretty shocked too that he did not win it. I was even considering Marvin, honestly, a little bit for the Heisman Trophy when I was trying to figure out who to vote for last year. I ultimately didn't vote for him, but I think he is absolutely the favorite for the Biletnikoff this year, and also I think he should be in the Heisman Trophy conversation coming into this season. Now, he doesn't have a returning starting quarterback, but neither did Devontae Smith when he won the Heisman Trophy a couple of years ago. So I don't think that precludes a receiver from potentially winning that award. I think he is on the short list of guys that you would say are the best returning players in college football, regardless of the position. And if you wanted to make an argument that he is the best returning player in college football, I think I would listen to you.
Do you think Marvin Harrison Jr. has a better shot of winning the Heisman because there's a new Ohio State quarterback? The theory, as you said that, I was like, well, usually the wide receiver is not going to win because the quarterback stats are going to surpass one wide receiver, because at Ohio State he's going to throw to more than one. So the numbers are going to be astronomical, and Marvin Harrison's will just be a slice of that pie. But given his production with CJ Stroud, and then potentially, let's just say that the next quarterback is able to do something similar, whether that's Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, we'll see. You say, well, maybe that it was easier for that quarterback because Marvin Harrison Jr. was there.
Yeah, I think that's what happened with CJ, right? CJ's first year, everyone was like, "Oh, it's the receivers he has around him. It's his weapons. It's not him." And then the second year, when all those weapons were gone, it was like, "Oh yeah, he is good. How about that?" So I do think at a place like Ohio State, the quarterback does tend to get viewed in that light. Unfortunately, in their first year, they're probably okay with it, I guess, if the trade off is they get to play with all those weapons every single week. But yeah, I I do think the fact that Ohio State does not have a returning starter at quarterback probably does increase Marvin's chances of being in that conversation. Obviously, like Caleb Williams is returning as the winner. People love Drake May. Cade Klubnik from Clemson could be in there. Pick your quarterback in a power program, and that guy's going to be in that conversation. But if you're lining up non-quarterbacks, Marvin should definitely be first on that list. I'm trying to think. There's probably somebody obvious that I'm not remembering, but I don't know. I don't know who would have a claim to like definite best at their position at an offensive skill position, like a greater argument than Marvin has right now.
Yeah, I don't. There definitely is not one in my mind. All right, so he's number one. He's the number one pick here. We can move on to number two, and you can go with the second pick.
Love that. I am going to pick Emeka Egbuka because I think he's almost as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he's really good. When I did my story on OhioState.Rivals.com, when I did like a thought or two on all the scholarship players, my thought on Emeka Egbuka was that I think Marvin had a better season and is probably a better prospect because the things that he does really well, he does, I think, better than Emeka, but Emeka's a really well-rounded receiver. I think he can do a little bit of everything quite well. And he was a 1,000-yard guy. And if we were in an alternative universe where Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't exist, I think a lot of people will be talking about Emeka Egbuka as potentially the best returning receiver in college football. I think he's a really special player. I think there's more for him too in this offense this year, whether that's carrying the ball, being used as a blocker, maybe even a little more. He's a pretty sturdy guy. So just a really versatile player who I'm not sure gets appreciated maybe as much as he should because he's playing alongside a guy who's an alien and the best player at the position.
And the evaluation or perception of Emeka was also hurt in the middle part of last season when he had 2-3 weeks in a row with drops when the shoulder injury was really limiting him. I don't think that, again, this is beating a dead horse, but the way Ohio State handled injuries last year did a disservice to Emeka Egbuka when he could not lift his arm, higher than shoulder level. Well, that's hard to play wide receiver when you need to be able to do that. It would have been helpful to put that in context. What those guys, even when they were out there, they weren't necessarily listed on the availability report or questionable. Like, shine a little light on that, and you can put that. Then your players don't get raked across the coals and say, "Wow, why can't Emeka Egbuka catch anymore? What's wrong with Julian Fleming? Like, what happened to Travion Henderson's burst?" Like, there's no downside to that. Like, it's not I don't want to keep talking about it. I guess it's driving me crazy. I think Ohio State's going to do something about that next year. But it goes to your point. Emeka Egbuka is really, really good, and he's going to have the football in his hands a lot next year. If Marvin starts getting consistent double team attention, that's going to be a problem for defenses still because Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming then get singled up, and not a lot of guys are going to be able to cover them, I don't believe.
No, I don't think so. I don't know how much. Well, I guess we won't see any of it in the spring because Emeka and Julian are injured or rehabbing, I guess is more the right way to put it. And Marvin, I don't think is going to play a ton, but come the fall, I'm anticipating them getting pretty creative with all three of those guys and moving them around, putting them in different spots, maybe having them run some different things than we saw them run last year.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I was like running through names of guys we could pick, and I thought this is like more interesting than the defensive draft, I think
this is going to surprise most of our listeners, maybe you, even myself, I would say. I think at number 3, you take Travion Henderson. Now, last year was a problem for him. Physically, mentally, both of those things wore on him. I think even when he was healthy enough, he was doing some things that were creating some bad habits, trying to get through some of the things that I like to flash back to J.K. Dobbins' sophomore year. After a successful freshman year, and then things are going to be really easy, and you make a big jump the second year, and you run into some adversity. Everybody who listens to the podcast regularly knows that I think that Mayan Williams is incredibly important to Ohio State, and last year I thought that he had earned the right to be the starter. When it comes to the highest ceiling and the potential for explosive plays, versatility, and next level success, which is part of this conversation that we're going to have, a healthy Travion Henderson is unparalleled in the rest of that room. And I'm banking that he comes back from those setbacks better than he was before. We saw that with J.K. Dobbins in his junior year. I think that can happen again. So some of this is a little bit of a bet on the future, but it's also what we've seen when he was a freshman and glimpses of it when he was able to get through it at times last year. So I would have him third, and I wouldn't have really thought that. And if this had happened in November of last year, definitely wouldn't have even had him in the top 8.
I had an internal conversation about the two top running backs, and I think if we're talking like pure talent and ceiling and projection, I think you're spot on. And I don't know if I, for this exercise, should take this into account, but I did. And the durability does scare me a little bit because Travion kind of wore down at the end of his freshman year, which is understandable in the context of him not playing at all the year prior to that as a high school senior. Of course, at some time that was probably going to catch up to him, and it appeared to. And then he came back last year and just like wasn't really healthy. I don't know. I guess he was healthy for like the first 2 weeks, or game and a half maybe, and then from that point on, he just wasn't himself and got into some bad habits, as you said. So I was going to pick Mayan Williams with my next pick. So I'll pick him now, I guess, as the fourth guy on our list, technically. If you look at their stats between he and Travion, they're more or less the same. Travion has more carries, so he has more yards, but Mayan's average is better. His touchdowns are right around the same. If you look at like Pro Football Focus, his missed tackles forced are significantly higher. His yards after contact are higher. I don't think he has the consistent home run ability that Travion has, but I also like a running back where you kind of know what you're going to get on a down-to-down basis, and I think Mayan Williams is more of that consistent player. But I could also be eating these words in like 6 months, because if a healthy Travion Henderson is going to be on the field for Ohio State, then that's a guy that can rush for like 1,500 to 1,800 yards next year. So just given the way that the careers have gone to this point, I feel a little more comfortable picking Mayan, but I think it's close. And I certainly understand anyone who, is in the Travion camp, because that kid is special.
I just can't help but think about all the parallels between, J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber and these two. Like Mike Weber, I thought that he would extend that NFL career potentially longer than he did. I thought he had that ability. It never quite connected with him at the next level. I kind of thought, I was surprised in December when, Ohio State was starting to say, well, we are expecting Mayan Williams back. I was like, really? Because he's been here for a while. He had a really successful year. That's a deep backfield that's coming back. It seems like it might be an ideal time for him to move on. And he didn't do that. That's good for Ohio State. It's tougher to manage that depth because you have Dallin Hayden, very good. Chip Trainum, very good. Evan Pryor hasn't had a chance to do it yet, but we know what his potential was like. That's a lot. And even just looking at 1 and 2 and trying to manage reps between Travion and Mayan is tough. So that's going to be fascinating to see how that works out. We've said that a lot of times before with Tony Alford and the running backs, but boy, this time it's to the nth degree. I mean, that is a crazy amount of talent they have assembled.
It is, and it's like I'm not going to like throw out a name, but it's a position you look at and think to yourself like, okay, are all 5 of those guys actually going to be here in the fall? It just and if they're not, it's just like the name of the game. I don't think it means anyone did anything wrong or anyone made a bad decision. I just that feels almost inevitable to me when you have that many guys who are on, like, they don't have a true freshman. They didn't take a freshman in this class. They don't have a true freshman who might be more willing to bide his time. And like Dallin Hayden probably got too much of a taste last year to know how good he is. So, and Evan Pryor is obviously itching to get on the field and show everyone why people were so excited about him last spring. So, I mean, no matter how it shakes out, I think Ohio State will end up with a really good situation at tailback. I don't know if this is as difficult as the situation's been for Tony, and I don't envy his position on trying to figure out a way to handle it.
No, but it's better than the alternative. We say that all the time of not having enough talent. Too much is the one that you'd pick for sure. What are we at? Number 5? Let's go.
This is 5 overall, yeah.
Cade Stover will be my selection for Ohio State. Another guy who could be preparing for the NFL draft right now. He gave that some consideration in December, even spilling over into January a bit after the health scare. Not just a scare, after the injury that required medical attention in the Peach Bowl and really changed things. There's a lot of attention to what happened to Marvin Harrison justifiably in the third quarter and what that meant for Ohio State. Losing Kate Stover before that, I think, may have been a bigger deal considering the length of time and then the relative lack of experience depth for Ohio State at tight end and how important that position is. You know, he had needed some time to get healthy. He's another guy that late in the year had the hip. He missed some blocks on the perimeter. You know that will eat at him because he prides himself on his toughness and technique and all those things about, you know, being a badass, whether that's at tight end or linebacker. Captain skills, veteran experience. He's got ball skills. He can do it all at tight end. He's going to be an NFL tight end, and having him back for Ohio State is a big deal.
Yep, I agree with all that. That he would have been my pick too, and I almost feel bad for him. Like the first half of the year was like we were experiencing like the tight end renaissance at Ohio State with the way that he was playing, both as a blocker and as a receiver, and whatever he encountered with that hip injury, I think just kind of really impacted his blocking. He still made some splash plays as a receiver, but his blocking, particularly in the edge, as you said, really seemed to suffer in the second half of the year. So he's got to get better at that. I'm sure he knows that. We don't have to tell him that. Kate Stover probably is well aware of what people think about the second half of his season, but he's a tough dude, man. I would want him on any football team that I was building, and if he can bottle up what he was in the first half of last year, then he's a all Big Ten kind of tight end and no doubt NFL player at that position.
100%.
Moving forward. We have not picked an offensive lineman yet.
Are you going to do it just because?
No, I think I'm gonna do it because I think it makes sense now, but I'm torn between two.
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with, I think they'll probably end up being both picked anyway. So I'll pick Matthew Jones, who, when healthy last year, I thought was their best interior offensive lineman. And again, another guy who like had the foot thing and was wearing the clown shoe, and that seemed to hinder him a little bit at times.
All year he wore that clown shoe.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. But he had a really good game, I thought, against Georgia, against like Jalen Carter and a good interior defensive line. And Luke Whippler did too. And Luke Whippler decided to take that and kind of strike while the iron was hot and go to the NFL. I thought that maybe Matthew Jones might do the same, but perhaps there was a little too much negative on that tape from the entire season because of the injury, and maybe he wanted to come back and account for that. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to Matthew about that yet. But that was a really strong performance from him, and really for like 2.5 years now, I think he's been a pretty strong performer on the offensive line. Like long term, I don't know what his projection is. I think Donovan Jackson probably has a higher ceiling than him as an offensive lineman long term, but Donovan was a little inconsistent last year, and Matthew, I think, is just an older guy. A veteran presence, even if he's not the most vocal guy in the world, but just a really solid football player. And he's going to be super important as kind of an anchor in the middle of that line this year.
I was wondering what your pick would mean for which offensive lineman I needed to talk about and was going to talk about, because I think that they are both the next in line. I was going to ask like how much of a concern you thought it was just that we went through the top 5. And last year, I think Paris Johnson would have been in there. You could have made cases for Luke Whippler and Dewan to some extent as well. Like getting down that list and it's starting to sink in a little bit that this situation on the line is a little bit more precarious, and that you don't have one guy that I don't think I wouldn't have given much thought at all to either Matthew Jones or Donovan Jackson in the top 5. And I don't think that's a great thing.
Yeah, I think part of that is positional value too. Like if everything was the same about how Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson have played to this point in their careers, but they were tackles instead of guards, I think maybe we'd think of them a little bit differently. But you are right. Like, I certainly would have picked Paris early last year. I probably would have picked Dewan pretty early last year because even at this point last year, like I wouldn't have picked Marvin Harrison Jr. first. I don't think. Well, we would have picked CJ first, but
and then we would have picked Jackson.
Yeah, and then Jackson, but then maybe Paris after that. And then maybe Dewan right after Paris. I don't know. I think you would certainly feel much better about the situation last year at this point than you do right now. But I think we'll see what happens at center, but the guard position I think is pretty solid for them. But when you think of like I don't know, like apex positions, and I realize it really can't be more than one apex, but like the places on the line that concern you when you're having to fill new spots, it just so happens that Ohio State is filling basically all three of them, the two tackles and the center position. And I think if they were filling two guard positions instead, you feel a little better about that.
Yeah, you definitely would. Donnie Jackson. If we're talking about sort of the fallback worst case scenario plan, which is kicking him out to tackle, that tells you how highly many people around the program, including us, think about his skill set. I know that there are many people inside the Woody who still feel like, well, this is it, that you're going to get one more year of Donovan Jackson, and he's off to the NFL. That's how high his ceiling is. And, I can see that. I don't think it happened on a play-in, play-out basis to the level that he would have wanted last year. I think after the missed assignment and the stunt against Iowa, I think that rattled his confidence a little bit. And guys go through that. That happens when you're a sophomore, when you're a first-time starter, you're playing a true sophomore, no less. Like, you're going to have to go through some of those moments, and he did. I think he's the kind of guy that will respond well to that. He's going to get stronger. He is stronger. He's going to be sharper. He's going to know what's going to happen when they pass off some of those things on the outside and the stunts coming in. I think he's going to be motivated to do that. And certainly when you look at the leadership component for this, he's going to almost certainly be more vocal than Matthew Jones. And the way he handles media sessions and time around his teammates, I think you can see that coming out of him. Didn't have to do it last year because there were three others that were NFL ready and much more comfortable doing that kind of stuff. You get to sit back and lead. You didn't have to take that mantle up right now, but he does at this point. As you said, now all three of those guys are gone, both on the field and in the locker room. That puts a lot of pressure on Donnie J.
It does. We probably should talk with Justin Fry more about that. It didn't really come up when we spoke to him in February, and obviously the most important thing in everyone's mind is like who's going to play where. But they did lose, basically all their leadership out of that room last year. And I'm sure like Matthew Jones has his own way of doing things, but when it comes to being a vocal guy, that's just not his bag, and it clearly is for guys like Paris and Luke and DeJuan Jones. Like Luke was the guy that the entire team like rallied around before every game, and he was hyping everybody up. Like someone's got to do that now. I don't know. Is it Donovan Jackson? I don't know. He feels a little too presidential for me to be that guy. But
well, I don't think he'll flip off the other team before heading to the locker room.
Yeah, no one ever really talked about that. But Luke did it like every game.
I feel like if we'd brought attention to it in the middle of the season, it would have become a thing. And I'm not trying to help Luke Whippler or Ohio State. And I think we'll just leave that till his career's over. Nobody's noticed it yet. Let's just leave it.
Yeah. Everyone's, look at Luke. He's having a good time down there. Like, no, he's flipping the bird to the other team before every single game. Whatever. That's right. Go Birds. It helped them play well. So this is technically our last pick then, the 8th pick. And I don't know if it's a good thing that I have no idea who to pick.
Oh, okay.
right now. Because there are only like two guys left who have played a little bit. One guy who's played quite a bit and one guy who's played a little bit. And then I guess a third guy who ended up having to play more than people thought. I guess like by default I have to go Julian Fleming.
Okay.
I'm considering Josh Fryer, but I think I will pick Julian, who had a really good year, especially relative to his journey like to that point. Everyone was like, when's this 5-star number 1 guy ever going to see the field? Is he a bust, whatever? And then I think last year he showed us the kind of upside that he has, and Brian Hartline has not been shy about saying that he thinks he has 3 first-round receivers in that position group. We'll see if that ultimately plays out for Julian, but he's got good long speed. He's a big, strong dude. I think he can be probably a better blocker than he was at points last year. Maybe some of that's health for him too. I would love to see him be a little better there. Maybe be a guy who can get the ball a little quicker and show off that speed after the catch. But especially as a complement to what Marvin and Emeka do, I think Julian's a really good fit there.
Yeah, and again, a guy who he thought that he was done with this shoulder stuff, and then he had one more surgery that he had to go through after the year. It's just I don't know. He's got a really high pain tolerance because he plays through it. He doesn't take these surgeries in the middle of the season. When he had a month to sort of get that body feeling fresh, you saw how well he played in the Peach Bowl. He's a handful, especially if he's on a team where he becomes the third option. And that's a lot of wide receivers aren't comfortable with that. And I think someone coming out of high school as the number one rated receiver in the country wouldn't love hearing that. But there's really nothing wrong with being the third option on a team like Ohio State because you're going to get a lot of one-on-one opportunities. You're going to get matched up against guys who have no business really being in coverage against you. You're going to find yourself in a lot of open territory. That's what happened against Georgia and one of the best defenses in the country. And if he can find some of that good luck and consistent health, boy, that's a real advantage for Ohio State. And it's going to be good for Julian Fleming's numbers.
Yeah, there was a point last year where it was like it just felt like you could bet on Julian was going to score a touchdown that week. Which is
well, now we can bet on that.
Yeah, it's right now. Now it is legal in the state of Ohio. Would you have picked somebody different there?
I think I would have. You said they were going to be wild cards. I may have, if I'd had 8th, I may have taken Kyle McCord. Mm-hmm. I don't know how large the chorus is. If I'm the only one leading it, what the rest of the beat, the fan base feels like. It's only been 2 practices in spring, so the battle hasn't even really begun. But I feel like Kyle is not getting the attention that a former 5-star who waited for 2 years behind a Heisman Trophy finalist, and now you get the chance to finally see him. He's not getting that kind of buzz that he normally would. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, that he has to have it. He deserves it. It's wrong that he doesn't get it. But the way that this has lined up for Ohio State with some of the, excitement around Devin Brown has really come at the expense of Kyle McCord. And I know that doesn't matter to him personally, but I think the reason I'm bringing it up is like Ohio State fans should probably be preparing themselves for the reality that Kyle McCord is going to be the face of this program. And he's got, if you're talking about a team to reach its highest ceiling, I think he's much closer to helping tap into that with his veteran edge and with an athletic skill set that is probably getting underrated just by nature of the comparison to Devin Brown. And I understand why that is. I don't have any issue with it. I think that a reminder of why there was so much excitement for Kyle McCord's recruitment in his freshman year and battling CJ a bit, that there was even a conversation for some of these same people who may have wanted CJ benched, was because of Kyle McCord. Like, that hasn't vanished. That still exists. So I may have snuck him in right there just because I do think he's going to be the guy.
I think it's at least worth mentioning for all the reasons you said, because I think, and I would consider myself guilty of this too. You do get kind of enamored with the new thing. There are definitely things athletically to be really excited about with Devin Brown. And we always say that about him, and we don't talk enough about the fact that he can actually spin it too. But it's the same thing with Kyle. Like, we know that Kyle's got a strong arm, but we probably don't talk enough about his playmaking ability. So I'm at the point where I'm trying really hard to not have really any opinions about either of them until we get to see more. I realize human nature is probably not to do that, and we want a resolution as quickly as possible, and we want to have fully formed opinions on both of them. 2 practices in the spring where they weren't wearing pads and that we only saw 30 minutes of each. I'm hopeful that they follow through on we get to watch a scrimmage next weekend thing. And it's not even like I want to watch that and then make up my mind. It's just like we don't really have a ton of data points to go off of, just to have a vibe for who these guys are. It doesn't even matter. We can think whatever we want. Ryan Day is the one who's making a decision, but I just want to be able to have a little more of a well-rounded opinion of who each of these guys are before we talk about them more in depth. Because we frankly probably haven't talked about them that much so far this spring, because in my mind, there's just not a ton to talk about. We haven't seen much of either of them, really. We saw Kyle start against Akron, but that was 2 years ago. I'm assuming a much different player now than he was in that game, right, in a lot of different ways. So I don't even know if it's worth talking about. Other than it's good for him to have that experience, but as a player, I'm not sure how much of it is actually applicable. So I think it's worth reminding people that if you're enamored with Devin Brown right now, you were probably enamored with Kyle McCord not that long ago, and maybe you should not forget that.
Yeah, I'm not telling people how to feel, but I do think that I would like to be more patient as well, like you're saying. But when I watch just a small amount of practice and think about what I've seen from Kyle McCord, even in the sample size on the field, the skill set coming out of high school, the knowledge that he's got, the time that he's got, all of that inside the program, like to me, it almost feels inevitable that he will win the job. Maybe I shouldn't feel that way. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I do think that that's the reality. And I don't want it to be construed as he's definitely way better than Devin Brown. That's not how I feel. And I'm not, sometimes this conversation gets boiled down to you're in one camp or the other. And I tried to make it this way when like covering Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins. I felt going into camp that Dwayne would win the job. This is not to pat my own back. I'm just saying I thought that was going to happen. It did happen. But I said throughout, when Joe Burrow was doing great things and I was noticing improvement, both of these guys can win the Big Ten for Ohio State. Which one are they more likely to pick, and what are the reasons for that? That led to Dwayne Haskins. That's probably the situation here. And the great thing for Devin Brown is that he still has another year of this. Like, it's crazy to think about that, but like, there's no rule that you have to play as a true sophomore at quarterback or you have to go somewhere else. He has plenty of time to continue to grow and develop. And if Ryan Day winds up being more comfortable with Devin Brown, cool. That means that they think he can win the Big Ten and beyond, that he's got a higher ceiling for this version of the offense. That may well happen because I'm not ruling that out. I can see both of them taking control of the Ohio State offense and them being the number one scoring attack in the country. I think right now, when you're looking at it, which one's closer to giving you that? It's Kyle McCord. And that I'm not sure how much would necessarily change between March and August because they're both going to potentially be progressing at the same rate, you would think, between now and then. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I mean, well, yeah, we'll see. There's a lot of time before I don't think they're going to come close to naming a starter coming out of spring. So we'll be having these conversations until August. So,
good, great.
Yeah. Well, it's more fodder for us, I guess. The one thing I will say that I do, like, I was impressed with Devin's like personality the first time we talked to him. Just like his the way that he didn't seem fazed by anything that was about to come his way, and he still carries himself that way. But Kyle McCord, I think, also has like a different sort of air about him now. Like he's not doing this in like a cocky way, but he is acting like he is Ohio State's starting quarterback. And I think that's hard to do when there's a guy like CJ Stroud in front of you. You should try to maybe act that way as best you can, even when you are reserved, so that when you're ready for when that time actually comes. I'm not sure if Kyle always did that, but now that he is like in those shoes and ready to and potentially step up into the starting job, I have been impressed with his demeanor when we've talked to him. So I don't know what that means. Maybe it means nothing, but I'm excited to see how it plays out.
So that means that Josh Fryer was your wild card?
No, so my wild card idea was so I'm in a dynasty fantasy football league, and we have a developmental roster where we like pick guys who were in college before they get to the NFL. And I was going to ask you to pick a guy who may not play this year, but who you would like to have on your developmental roster for a year or two down the road.
Oh boy, who may not play this year
or may not play a ton this year, like not be a starter.
Yeah. I think the safest bet is you blindfold yourself, you pick up a dart, and you throw it into the wide receivers room.
Yeah, probably right.
Yeah, I mean, well, for fantasy football, you wouldn't want Luke Montgomery. He's not going to do anything for you.
You don't know about that. He could.
That's right. He might. Yeah, I mean, certainly that's what you'd want is one of Ohio State's wide receivers. And I haven't seen Brandon Ennis with my own eyes yet. Everyone tells me that that's going to be the one that you're going to stash away. I think to give some attention to that second-year wide receiver group that we've talked about, maybe that would be Caleb Brown, be the one that I would pick out of that group. I guess I would say someone who we didn't mention, who I think is going to play a lot more this year and deserves to, and maybe worth stashing down the road, is Joe Royer. He doesn't necessarily fit into your category there for the wild card, but he started coming out of that adversity late last year. I know how highly he's thought of inside the Woody, and I do like the pairing. We talked about that in the tight end preview show in February. Putting him and Cade Stover side by side really reminds me a lot of the Ruckert-Farrell combination that was so successful. You can see both of those guys being NFL tight ends down the road. So I think that's one to bear watching. But I mean, if you're not banking on Brian Hartline developing more 4 and 5 star wide receivers, well, whatever. That's just free money.
Yeah, take the free money every day of the week. I like Noah Rogers. I think he'd be my guy. Because like size and speed combination is kind of off the charts, and Brian Hartline was asked specifically about Noah Rogers, so I don't want to make too much of the glowing terms with which he spoke about him, but they were pretty glowing. And he just wasn't asked specifically about the other guys in the room. I'm sure he would have had similar things to say if he was. But I was a little like, that's interesting. Brian Hartline seems really like this guy. And he's like a sub 4.4 guy in high school. He's 6'2". He looks great in his first spring at Ohio State. So yeah, I would buy a whole lot of Noah Rogers stock if I could.
I don't know if he would have necessarily spoke that glowingly of all of them. He's not one to blow smoke for his young guys. He's a bit of a straight shooter when it comes to the evaluations, as even a young Garrett Wilson can attest.
Yeah, I appreciate that about him.
Yeah,
like because usually when coaches like don't have a good thing to say, they just don't say anything. Like Brian Hartline he'll tell you what he thinks.
Yeah, you're not getting a lot of. He's working really hard and he's getting some reps out there in the practice field, and he's got a chance to contribute for us. Not getting a lot of that from Brian Hartline.
No, certainly not.
Not trying to fill up the notebooks with erroneous information. Well, that was fun. We should do this more often. What a great idea to draft. Thanks, Jim Knowles. And thanks to Bill Landis for, making this another way to get through the dry spell of spring break. Just when we thought we were in the clear and back to daily content and daily coverage of the team, spring break hits. Most people are just counting down the days for it. I don't like spring break anymore. Kill it.
No, now that I'm 34 years old, spring break has lost the luster for me.
I mean, I don't think these kids are even going on spring break. They're probably all in the Woody every day and doing meetings and who knows what else this week. But I guess they don't have to, technically. Anyway.
Some guys are definitely leaving town because Ohio State put out a video where like Jack Sawyer's like, I'm going to Lauderdale. I was like, all right. I bet that first practice back after your trip to South Florida is going to be real fun.
He's going down there to train with the Bosas.
Maybe he could be. I think Kyle McCord said he was like going somewhere to throw with receivers. I was like, all right, I guess that's a useful spring break.
Yeah. We should go do that. I want to go throw with receivers too. I don't know if our wives or our kids would be in favor of that, but just a way to recapture the magic. Anyway, we're going to be here in Columbus, and we're going to be talking on the podcast all week. This has been the Daily for Tuesday. Hope you enjoyed the offensive draft. A lot more content from that first week of spring still coming your way as we get ready for week 2, which again will not be until week 3 after it started. Don't worry about the math. It makes sense in my head. That's Bill. I'm Austin. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.